Hi, I'm Jared Fuller. Welcome to Scratching the Surface. I feel like something has shifted in the last decade or so around design, around how we talk about it, around how we evaluate it, around how it's perceived. I remember when I was in design school almost 20 years ago now, design felt like it was riding this wave of progress. And there was this belief that design could and would be a part of solving the world's biggest problems. This was the era of design thinking and social design. I remember hearing how designers wanted a seat at the table and they were starting to get those seats. Design was seen, at least for many of us, as a force for good. And there was this belief, however naive, that with more design, anything could be better. It's harder to believe that now. There's a skepticism I detect. I detect it in myself, in others, in the larger discourse around the power of design, around what design can actually do, around its purpose. There's a sense that we've fallen short of the promises that we made to ourselves. At times, design can feel insular and egotistical. It can feel sometimes too intellectual and disconnected from the day-to-day reality. Or sometimes it's just surface-level band-aids, a brand refresh that fails to understand some larger context. If design is problem-solving, are we solving the right problems? Is design education setting students up to be let down? How did design lose its way? This last question, how did design lose its way, in many ways is the question of this fascinating, strange, funny, and biting new book called The Design Comedy, The Descent Through Inferno. This book is a reworking of Dante's epic poem, The Divine Comedy, and is a searing indictment, in my view, of the state of design, and perhaps even more specifically, the state of design academia. The book comes out of its author, Otto von Busch's real career struggles. Otto is a designer who comes out of a craft background. He's worked across design fields, mostly in fashion, and is currently a professor of integrated design at Parsons School of Design in New York. This book, in many ways, is his attempt to reconcile, to make sense of, to poke fun at the ways we talk about design today, and sometimes his own role in that. I loved this book so much. I laughed out loud, but I also felt seen. It captured the feeling of being a designer, or at least to me, the feeling of being a design educator today, better than anything I can remember in recent years. So I invited Otto on the show to talk about the book, to talk about its interesting formal conceit, but also to talk about why something feels off in design today. We start this conversation talking about the design comedy and Otto's own experiences as a designer and educator that helped shape its narrative. We then talk about education and what it means to be teaching designers today before ending with a look back on Otto's other book, Making Trouble, which was this fascinating look at how design practices can aid in social change. Otto's interest in the materiality of design, the actual craft of making things, is perhaps the thread that ties all of this together. This is a really fun and really thoughtful conversation about the pleasures and the perils of being a designer today. I really hope you like it. And if you do like it and you want to hear more of this, you can support our work by joining our Substack. We have a monthly newsletter that is free to everyone, but we also have a paid tier that gets you a bonus interview each month and helps keep this show free for everyone all the time. I hope this show is like listening to a great conversation in a coffee shop. And so really for the price of a cup of coffee a month, you can help us do this work and put more of it out into the world. Otto von Busch, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
I want to start by talking about this new book of yours, The Design Comedy, The Descent Through Inferno. And I was going to try to explain it, but I kind of want to hear your description of it first. How do you describe this book. What is the design comedy?
Well, obviously, it's a paraphrase on Dante's Divine Comedy, and specifically Inferno, the first part of Dante's Inferno, um, and it is a a struggle, an internal struggle with the state of design, academic design primarily, and my wrestling with my own situation, if
Mm.
you want to say so, and history, if you want to say so, around design. And I mean, it is a paraphrase in many ways too, because just like Dante's Inferno was his internal struggle with his own midlife crisis, if you want to say so, perhaps not past midlife crisis, but still,
Yeah.
that's a so it is a paraphrase on that, and an inner journey and this wrestling with design.
We'll get into the book itself, but the back cover of the book, the text on the back opens with the line, "Design is a hellmouth of disappointment and a harrowing pit of professional failure," which you sort of hinted at in your description of your midlife crisis and your kind of wrestling with design. I feel like that sums up the vibe of the book a little bit. So before we get into the actual writing in the book, why is design a hellmouth of disappointment and a pit of professional failure?
So what I'm struggling with in the book is what is the promise of design
Mm,
and the promises we make perhaps across the whole field, but that draws the students into design and into design school, and the mythology of progress and possibilities of changing the world
mm-hmm.
that we nourish within design school. And then do we actually deliver on this, or is it all some sort of social dreaming that we actually and a realm of hypocrisy? And of course, what I struggle with is my own participation in this.
I mean, I love how you kind of set this up as, I'm not even sure exactly I have the right language for it, but the this conflict between the promise of design, this utopian world changing idea, and then the realities of actually being a designer in a capitalist system. I was wondering if you could read a passage of the book for us that actually speaks to this idea, and I also think kind of just gives readers a sense of kind of the tone and the style of the book.
All right, so this is where the second level of hell that uh, I am led down to by Virgil, the fired woodshop technician. And we end up in the garden with the opium eaters. And this is again a paraphrase on, again, in Dante's Inferno. The garden is where the unbaptized philosophers from before the birth of Christ, so they are in hell because it was before
Mm-hmm.
they could be redeemed by Christianity. So we are in the in the garden of designers, and here Virgil shows me around, or shows Otto around what is happening. Who are these people with their lucid dreaming? Opium eaters deceived by massive change, as walls crumbled with power rearranged. Winds of change, the anthem of the air. TED Talks flourished with all hope laid bare. In the haze, freedom's cry resounded, a realm of hopes and futures unbounded. Information wants to be free, they sing. Here, countercultures hailed a boundless spring. In their vision, the environment is freely gifted, an open field where human spirits can be lifted. Possibilism, Virgil said, is the design can find, where design can find a world full of change and potential undefined.
Thank you for that. I love that passage because I think that both is a good description of the big ideas in the book, but it also sets up some of the narrative which you were starting to set up. And so in the design comedy, there is a design professor also named Otto who is looking for the design workshop and he meets the workshop technician Virgil, who sort of takes him through these layers of hell to get to the workshop. Where did this idea come from? How did you where did you realize that your own struggles in design could be transposed kind of so nicely onto Dante? Because this is a high concept book that I admit when I got it, I did not think this was going to work. And it was so funny and so interesting. I laughed out loud. Like it sort of captures that feeling so perfectly. How did you arrive at this? Can you talk to me a little bit about your process of putting this together?
Well, yes. So first of all, that's you know my background is in sort of crafts and making,
Mm-hmm.
and I've always really tried to be close to the workshop and making in my both my teaching and in the practice that I'm doing as a teacher and as an academic. Um, and but I'm also a writer. I've been writing. I've been doing that academic game. You write your papers, you write your
Yeah.
book chapters, you write some books. And it's been working okay. I know many colleagues that are really really struggling and feel that aspect of academic design work is really uh, a challenge for them. To me, it's a way of thinking, and I've been lucky enough to be able to articulate much of what I've been trying to do, which meant that when I started having these doubts, and it's been growing upon over the last perhaps 10 years, but I think perhaps I've seen whatever a few years back it got worse and worse, if you want to say so.
Okay.
And I started to take down notes and write about them in the type of academic style that I've been used to write things, in the
Mm.
sense of papers and arguments and da da da. And I just felt like this, I can't continue like this, in a sense. And I felt sort of, uh, I need to add. This is a complex and sort of polyvocal. There's many positions, many parts that are in a struggle here. That if I sort of just write it as an academic article or something, it wouldn't capture the tensions in the same way
Mm.
that I
Mm-hmm.
was hoping to get to. And then I just stumbled upon, after I sort of had I organized all the things
Yeah.
that were wrong. I just realized, oh my god, I can actually organize these in levels of hell.
Okay.
In
Yeah.
a sense, there's actually degrees in which this hypocrisy and betrayal of these hopes can actually be ordered.
Mm.
That some types of design dreaming is more innocent
Yeah.
than
Yeah.
some more sinister forms. And so then Dante's Inferno came to me, and I started sort of rephrasing the way I thought about this at the same time as I read Dante's Inferno, of course, and some of the translations. And then, of course, stumble upon many artists and so on who have been using
Yeah.
before, Dante's Inferno and this kind of format to paint the sort of the complex and multivocal aspects of a narrative, and that was what sort of drawn me to Dante. And then, of course, things started falling into place, and especially, of course, around these iconic Dorés woodcuts that I then started sort of manipulating in Photoshop for fun, but also then used to sort of illustrate. So
Mm.
there are some levels of hell that in Dante's Hell that I would really have loved to have put some designers in, but which I didn't because Dorés woodcuts were not illustrating that. So, for example,
Yeah.
one is a beautiful the fortune tellers
Mm.
and the clairvoyants in Dante's Inferno, since they are seeing the future. Their punishment, or say they can see the future. The punishment in Dante's Hell is that their heads are turned backwards, and they have to walk around in hell not seeing where they're going. And again, what Dante, this is the fun part with reading Dante, because it's like full of kind of vulgar speech. It's actually really funny too, and very sort
Right.
of vivid about the punishments.
Yeah.
And of course, these fortune tellers, they are crying as they're walking with their heads turned backwards. And he writes down, how their tears are running down their back and between their butt cheeks. So I think that is actually an appropriate illustration of what designers are going to punish with in hell. But unfortunately, I had to skip that one. But
Well, I mean, I want to be. I'm wondering if we should actually be a little more specific here and talk about some of the doubts that you were having about all of this and the hypocrisy you were seeing. Some of the things that I was reading in the book is sort of a critique of design theory, or the usefulness of design theory, the kind of the never-ending race of academia, the sense of like, if you just publish more, if you add lines to your CV, I think that's one of the lines, something about lines on your CV, that this is going to you sort of question the value of that. And so there's this larger kind of takedown of the role of academia. We've hinted a little bit at this conflict between kind of ideas and the actual physical making, which maybe speaks to design's relationship, or design academia's relationship to reality. Are there others that I'm missing, or is there a way that you can kind of talk about specifically, like, what were these doubts that you were having that prompted these ideas?
yeah, and it comes back to the section that I just read about, the opium eaters in
Mm-hmm.
in
Yeah.
in the first level of or second level of hell. And it starts with this: how were we? And again, we a generation of designers that lived through the fall of the Berlin Wall, the end of the Cold War, the end of possible end of apartheid, and then all the sort of the color revolutions of the Eastern Europe and former Soviet Union and so on. So and so that whole, and then the birth and sort of the emergence of early internet
Mm-hmm.
as this kind of invented technology that was designed and changed so many aspects of society. So it seemed, on one hand, that social change was almost without struggle, that social change just happened. Even then, sort of
Mm-hmm.
the fall of there was no bloody revolutions, there was no, it just sort of
Mm-hmm.
happened. And then at the same time came internet, and sort of with these ideas of democratization, participation. It was a very sort of bloomy world where the current design discourse was formed and shaped.
Yeah.
And so much of this idea that design can really change the world with very minimal types of interventions too. I mean, basically for the internet, of course, data centers and digging in broadband, but it wasn't like create highways everywhere or high-speed trains or build nuclear reactors and like it's a big sort of
Yeah.
that kind of
Yeah.
infrastructural huge changes. But suddenly the world changed in an unbloody way, in a democratic participatory way that seemed to have design put design in a position that it seemed to have superpowers. And again, the fascinating part there with the sort of massive change. I remember reading that book in Bruce
Yeah.
Mau's Massive Change, and it was like, whoa! When it came, I was like, design is this amazing thing,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
and and again, I think the lived reality of those times in the West, felt that it was immensely true.
Yeah.
And I think we were all bound into this, that if we only scratch the surface of any place in the world, there is a little democracy living underneath there that just wants to bloom, and participation and all these things is the natural order of things. We just need to sort of put
Mm-hmm.
things back into the natural order of things as designers. And it's not so simple, And I think that
Yeah.
sort of, and again, that led us to these ideas, I think, that are sort of common within design field and design education, that creativity and ideas and imagination is
Yeah.
what we should embrace and focus on and nourish in the classroom, at the same time as like empiricism and reality and sort of the real sort of struggles of the everyday sort of a little bit falls into, we can put that in the worry cloud here over here.
Yeah.
Let's have some
Yeah.
more ideas and put some more post-its about possibilities. And we sort of put, and of course there's something fantastic about that. but there is also a growing sort of cognitive dissonance between all these beautiful ideas and the pitch decks that we produce and
Mm-hmm.
these
Mm-hmm.
beautiful renderings that get more and more convincing for if
Yeah.
you're in the field, but at the same time as exactly the distance between the reality and the struggles of making this true or making them happen is increasing or has been increasing, and I think that's the sort of the struggle that comes at the at the core of the design comedy here.
I'm never quite sure if that impulse that you described to kind of for the designer to put themselves in the center of this social change, if that comes from ego of look how powerful these tools that we have trained in and the ideas that we have and the creativity that we have, look how powerful they are, is it ego based or is it actually uh coming out of an insecurity that it's I come from a graphic design background which has a long history of wanting to be seen as not art as more than visual, and is this move to higher levels of system change design, and we'll get into this more because I think this is a big part of your work, this move from the materiality to the idea, is that actually out of some insecurity in not knowing the value of what we do? Do you have a thought on that? Where do you think this impulse comes from? Is it pure ego or is it actually some sense of lacking in the field?
No, I think there is something that is so seductive about the world of ideas.
Mm,
Um, and I think this also has to do with design's move and how the art world opened its doors to design and design practice in many ways. That
mm,
that suddenly now we take for granted that museums are having design exhibitions of
right,
various sorts. Of
right,
course, there's a
right,
long history to that, but we
right.
see more of them. Similarly, at the time, fashion moved into museums and into like being dealt as a sort of a serious
Hmm.
topic, whereas before it was not, regarded necessarily as that. So similarly, I think there's something deeply seductive for designers to be welcomed into the world of ideas
Mm,
and reading theories that takes design seriously. And that creates sort of analytical, powerful tools for designers to articulate their practice in a way where they perhaps before were more seen as in some kind of professional training and vocational and so on, and instead, being exactly coming into the realm of the higher ideas and the
yeah,
prestige, the biennales,
right,
the
right.
salons, the museums. There is a certain prestige and a certain longing, of course, for anyone to have their ideas taken seriously and being sort of discussed, also with a much richer toolbox of concepts and so on. That, of course, especially the art world has long been utilizing to
Yeah,
sort of discursify their practice. And of course, for designers, that felt like, wow, suddenly we are coming into the higher,
right, right,
you know. And at the same
right.
time, on the other hand, getting into with design thinking and all these kind of things that also came, that there's actually sort of a seat at the table,
Yes,
this idea
yes.
that designers actually had some sort of power also in the realm of capitalism and the big corporation. So it's like this amazing trajectory that design took over the last generation, if you want to say so, from being a vocational training in a sense to actually becoming both in the so some corporations in the board, but also in the museums. And of
Yeah.
course that is deeply seductive to us as a field.
I think that's right, and I think that's as we said in this new book, the design comedy, the narrative here is a professor who has lost their way back to the workshop, to where the actual making happens, and this is a theme of a lot of your work, this idea about this relationship between ideas and making, or the physicality of design versus the ideas of design. It's the core of one of your other books, Making Trouble, Design and Material Activism, which looks at these ideas about how craft making material skills can also foster societal change. It doesn't just happen at this higher level. In the introduction to that book, you write, even if the dean may tell you otherwise, in the chain of being that permeates design schools, matter is low, whereas ideas and systems all appear higher. Not only are the workshops placed near ground level in the buildings, often even in the basement, but they are also low ranking in the status hierarchy of academic labor. I'm wondering if you could talk to me about that hierarchy a little bit. You're already kind of talking about the seductiveness of these ideas. Where did that start to shift from design being about matter, about making, about materiality, to about ideas? And what do we lose in that transition?
Right. I mean, I think a design historian would have to sort of look at this more accurately, you
Yeah.
know. But I mean, one can say that, you know, with the sort of deindustrialization that happens across Western countries, you know, when production is not necessarily around the corner,
Mm,
designers are not necessarily drawn into the industry in the same way, you know, at least in sort of the making kind of production industries. At the same time, you know, we should also see that around, you know, the 90s and so on came also this big idea of the knowledge economy,
yeah. Yeah.
that we were actually, you know, Western society was going to sort of move away from being production societies into this knowledge society. And of course, again, that created this boom of higher education, of this ideas that everything should become the
Yeah.
higher
Yeah.
education
Yeah.
topic. And again, it created its own economy. It created its own types of labor where knowledge labor became, in a sense, you know, what part of design work was, in that sense of you know, discursifying a lot of the practices. And I think that also has happened now with, you know, more and more types of artistic and practice-based research and so on, which
Hmm.
again, you know, says that it's practice-based, but very often the outcome is still text-based. It's still conferences where
Yeah.
people come and talk. You know, there's very little of that sort of happening in the workshop itself. And the irony again is that within theory, there has been this material turn, you know,
Mm,
where suddenly material culture, material, there's all these talks and methods and theories around materiality and practices and things that seems to be empowering for designers at the same time as it's analytically powerful, but not necessarily enhances a
uh,
practice.
yeah.
So suddenly, you know, it's fantastic with actor network theory and Latour and all these kind of things and the ways we have, and of course, the super those theories and the object oriented, you know, all these things that we put labels on these things, you know, they are so again seductive for designers because it puts design as this. We are no longer just the cog in the capitalist machine. What we
Right.
do really
Right.
matters, and that's really encouraging. And it again, it's a powerful language for designers to unpack their practice, but has it really affected design practice? Have we really been able to transform this into some new social change, whatever we talk about? That I think that's yeah, that's part of. There's a level of hell for that too.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I want to be clear about the kind of the argument that you're making because I don't actually think you're pitting these against each other. I think my reading of your work is you're trying to find the connection between the idea and the materiality. And in your book, Making Trouble, you talk about this idea of designing for the meta and designing for the matter. Could you talk about that I don't know what you call it, that scale, that intersection, what it means to design for the meta and what it means to design for the matter?
Yes, that makes so. So in making trouble, I'm trying to sort of wrestle a little bit with this. How does change happen when we, you know, in and the way we talk about it in design I just used an example of like, let's imagine that the ball gets stuck in the tree and we're trying to get the ball down, you know, and
Right.
we can either sort of break off a branch and try to sort of reach it in a sense and sort of, you know, that's a very sort of material way of doing it. Or we can try to sort of organize ourselves so that we all grasp the tree and then we shake it together
Right.
in concert so that the ball sort of falls down. And very often, somehow, this social organizational aspect, what I think they're sort of call the meta, is what we are sort of drawn to in when we use theories and so on, that when we talk about design, and especially when we talk to about strategies of change,
Yeah. Yeah.
we are immediately drawn into this kind of meta world of organization, which also then leads us to, as designers, uh, create these kind of again, trying to convince people to join us. We're trying to sort of create
Hmm.
the stories. Design becomes a form of storytelling where we're going to project these new futures that we are going to and convince people to join us in. Which means that we sort of lay aside what is perhaps our most powerful tools in design school, which is in a sense that we can create and build stuff, which is at the
Right.
heart of design education. That the distance between your thought and your idea and to the reality that people can look at and discuss. If that is a poster, if that is a website that is set up, if that that
Hmm.
we get bogged down into the social organization of things rather than what if we actually use the tools that is our closest to
Yeah.
our hands and
Yeah.
perhaps our hearts, and try to figure out how they actually help contribute to this kind of changes that we want to see. And so in Making Trouble, I try to sort of get to that matter, into the workshop, to see again what are the social practices or the design practices, the sort of almost crafts
Yeah.
that are powerful enough, not discursively, not ideal, with the
Uh-huh.
realm of
Yeah. Yeah.
ideas, but they're powerful enough for the state to outlaw them, and that is why I sort of look at then, lockpicking, moonshining, these things that come in friction with the state, and they're powerful. The state argues that they're powerful exactly because they start
Right.
rubbing against
Right.
the foundations of the state, which is, for example, ownership and taxation and these kind of things. And again, the interesting part for me there is that they are material practice. This is stuff basically we all could do at design school. We don't necessarily need to move into the realm of parliamentary politics and NGOs and these very sort of complex diplomatic games that we are very untrained to do. Instead, we can stay to within practices that are closer to our
Yeah.
the skill
Yeah.
sets we build, and and how could we do that? And so that's what I'm wrestling with in 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 Making Trouble.
Yeah,
Sorry, that was a long
well,
answer.
no, that was great. And you have this great line in the book where you say, while the meta may seem abstract, it is most often housed or reflected in the matter. And I love that, this definition that I've been using of design over the last, I don't know, 10 years now is that design is ideology made artifact. That what design really is good at is taking an abstract idea and giving it a physical form, taking a point of view or a way of seeing the world and making it concrete in some way, which sounds like kind of what you're talking about here. Is that it's like, how do we take these ideas and actually embed them in physicality? And that physicality obviously could be digital. I'm not saying like objects, but how do you give it a shape that someone can, kind of grab onto and understand?
Oh yeah, certainly so. And in the book, I mean, a padlock or a lock is a
Yeah.
typical example of this. Where the whole idea of the property regime, or the idea of that the state guarantees property,
Yeah.
and then the lock picking becomes a way in which you're trying to sort of use a sort of material
Yeah.
counterintelligence to
Yeah.
outsmart the person who designed the lock that will keep you out. So again, we can discuss the ideas of property, the ideas of these delineations that the state sort of supports and provides. We can do that in a discursive seminar, but we can also do it by having a workshop where we teach ourselves lockpicking.
Right.
And that lockpicking workshop is much closer to the skill set and the worldview, in a sense, of the designer than the legal frameworks and the sort of the theories around the politics of property and these kind of things, and
Yeah.
so to me the challenge is like when we do these readings and trying to understand society within a design school, how do we bring it to the tools of the designer? So again, like by doing lockpicking, for example, or by doing
Yeah. Yeah.
actually practicing what we can do from from the tools that we have at hand at design school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, how how do you do that? Because also in Making Trouble, not to stay in this book for a second, but you also have this great line where you say, no matter how much designers claim theory and practice is one and the same, I often find it challenging to create studio experiences where the two convincingly overlap. How do I apply object-oriented ontologies, the carpentry of things, tool being in or the material turn when I try to teach the basics of wood turning? How you teach at Parsons, you teach in this program called integrated design. How are you engaging with these ideas in the classroom, or how do you get students to kind of move between or connect idea and object or theory and making? What are some strategies you found that have worked there?
Yes, to me, that is what I find the challenge, and already when I, taught more sort of fashion related classes, I always try to sort of bring in a sort of a, you know, sewing elements and so on, where we were not only sort of discussing the theories of things. But what I'm trying to do now, I mean, is figuring out how we can build more things and have more of our sort of seminars in the workshop. So, for example, now over the last years, I feel a challenge for me has been around the question of civics, for example, and togetherness. Like, how do
Mm.
we actually think about or and practice civics and togetherness? And that
Hmm.
and just again to take a step back, what making and the building aspect does is that it leaves a tangible trace in the world.
Mm.
We
Hmm.
can build things and they are there and we can touch them, and when we leave after the day, they're
Yeah.
there in a
Yeah.
sense,
Yeah.
which is, and they're not only a document in the hard drive somewhere or some very ephemeral uh, thing. So what I've been trying to do is really like, how do we build things together then, and how do we set up the classroom so that togetherness is what we need to do?
Yeah.
So for, I mean, and this is everything from like, and I've been practicing this with some colleagues from Sweden. It's over, so we've been doing a class called Making Civic Crafts. But again, where the idea is like, we go up to Home Depot on 23rd Street to buy our wood, you know, and what I tell, or what you tell the students is that you're not allowed to carry any of your material yourself. You have to be two to carry, So all the pieces of wood, etc., we carry together, Then what we do is sort of we build benches, again, which is something where we sort of have to sit together to do, and we have, used a series of crafts and tools where you also again have to be two or three. So for example, making ropes with the rope making machine, one has to sort of turn the crank and the other have to hold. Again, we've been producing a series of tools. I have behind me here a series of toolboxes that we built where the hand, there's like 1.5 meter long toolboxes, but there's a handle in each end. So
Mm.
you cannot carry it yourself. You have to ask someone for help. So
Right.
again, it's like, how do we sort of build tools that are collaborative by necessity and that are, built in the sort of the vulnerability that you have to compromise. You have to, in order to get something to be done, you have to engage in a sense with the civics. So again, what I'm fascinated by here is like, how do we touch some of these topics that we otherwise leave in the realm of meta, if you want to say so, in this abstract realm of ideology, ideas, imagination, and make them more tangible, and again bring them to the the workshop and the environment that designers are in.
Yeah.
So yeah, if that makes sense.
And also vice versa, bring the materiality back into the seminar room in some way. It's like,
Of course.
it's how do you connect those? I mean, your work in this conversation is one of those where I kind of feel my own assumptions being challenged a little bit, and sort of things that I had internalized. I think I'm realizing how I got swept up in the seductiveness of the idea also. And one of the conversations that I feel like I'm involved in all the time is, what is the role of design education today? What does it mean to teach a design student today? What is a design student of any type supposed to know when they go out into the field? And I feel like there has been a move away from the matter, away from the physicality. And I think there's a little bit of a an ego there of we are more than a trade school. You know, that's sort of the
Hmm.
argument for that. There's a little bit of you can learn any of this stuff on YouTube. You know, why do you pay for 4 years of education? How do you think about that question? What is the role of design higher education as it relates to this tension that we've been talking about in this conversation? How do you sort of reconcile that or think through that?
Again, it comes back a little bit to the cognitive dissonance that I feel design school is caught in these days, where we have an increase, perhaps I've had a sort of, again, this discourse that the whole world is malleable, the whole world has this, everything is designed so everything can be redesigned.
Right.
And we
Right.
tell our students that over and over, and we give them all kinds of scenarios, all kinds of theories and ideas that this is the way the world is. At the same time, as they are in an institution where they cannot change anything, you know. And talk about cognitive dissonance. No
Yeah.
wonder my
Yeah.
students are having uh, uh, anxiety and so on, because we are hammering them full of these uh, exactly, double binds, we want to
Yeah.
call them.
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
definitely cognitive dissonance, and our own institutions are not. Again, in the classroom, everything is possible, and in this little paper and this little pitch deck that you will do
Mhm.
for it becomes a PowerPoint, the world can change, but you dare not go and use the those tools or whatever, or try to think or put up posters in the corridor, or
Yeah.
I have
Yeah.
no idea what sort of. But it's a weird um, dissonance there and tension where I feel higher education today in design has to be much more designerly, if you want to say so,
Mm,
in the sense that we have to be able to offer an environment in which design is encountered more than in the classroom, and the agency that design helps provide is something that the students can test in many more avenues than within the classroom and the sort of the classroom assignment. Meaning then also we need to sort of build in much more empirical practices in that sense,
mm,
just so for example, I mean, just take a 15-week class as an example. What often happens is that students, they have to come up with a super good idea, and they have to sketch it, and they have to da 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 da, and they have to read some too. And of course, those students that are interested in reading, they start reading more and more. And the more they read, the more anxious they get, because then so they read longer and longer. But most classes
yeah.
end up with very little empirical practice in the end, where they
Mm,
actually are testing, like, does this work or not? And most often they don't even test it in that
yeah.
sense,
Yeah.
even though
Yeah.
we say that there should be iterations and all these kind of things. And again, we're not necessarily producing an environment within the school itself where social practices or alternative economies, I have no idea, all these kind of things that we perhaps imagine that designers could take on, but our school environment doesn't necessarily
Yeah.
offer them the opportunity to practice this. And again, it's like I think again that is what we have to be better at as designers and as design institutions.
I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about your specific context, because you teach in a program at Parsons called integrated design, which I'll be honest, I'm not totally sure I know what that mean. Unlike something like graphic design, where it's like, oh, that's a field, like you can go and be a graphic designer. I don't know if students are graduating to become integrated designers. What types of students are you teaching? Where do they go? Can you just sort of ground some of this that we're talking about in your context?
I think, I mean, integrated design is a what you would call almost like a traditional, transdisciplinary types
Okay.
of
Okay.
undergrad, where they have a lot of elective space to be able to take classes from all across the school, and that sort of uh, has its up and downs, in the sense, some students get lost because there's too much choice, others, can flourish and so on, so it's it is in a sense a child of how we have thought about design over the last 20 years or so.
Mm.
um, and um, and of course, they go to all kinds of different industries these days. And it's hard but again, like many design industries too today that are by themselves transdisciplinary in so many different ways.
You mentioned earlier you have a background in craft. You have a PhD in fashion and fashion theory. How do you find yourself in a program like this? And how does that background kind of influence how you teach?
So at the integrated design program, there was a little bit more of a fashion focus when I was hired,
Oh,
um,
okay.
because the the main fashion program at Parsons was very strict. So a lot of students sort of dropped out and wanted to do more kind of interdisciplinary things, ended up in the integrated design, but they still had a fashion interest, which again, brought was a good place for me because in my thesis and in my work I had been trying to sort of figure out how could fashion be hacked in a sense.
Right.
Could we imagine the fashion is an operating system that could be much more like Linux or much more open source and so on. So I was myself trying to well spent much of my life on trying to reimagine and rethink the way that we could engage with fashion and the fashion industry could take many more forms and engage in many more types of practices than only churning out commodities in the way that the sort of the mass production
Yeah.
type of fashion industry we see. So that was where I've been doing most of my teaching throughout these years, and I also taught fashion theory classes
Yeah.
and so on. But over the last years, it's been much more again sort of coming back to the craft aspect and again perhaps a frustration in a sense with fashion too. That the things that I was hoping, or many, not only me, were hoping that fashion could change. Um, it's much harder to do, and fashion in itself is perhaps not the right avenue for that, because the seductiveness of fashion is so strong, and it's how it's entangled with so many aspects of our current organization of society and the values of our society. It's so hard to break that, so that and I needed a little bit of a break too, in a sense of getting out to talk about. I mean, fashion is in itself so egocentric. It
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
one user. It is clothes that one person wears, and then they have it in the wardrobe, and
Mm.
and so on. And I needed to like. There's something about building things together that we can meet around. It creates meaning for many people that come together. There's something about building a bench together with the students where we can sit together at the same height,
Mm.
and we don't necessarily need to agree. I think this is also one thing that is fascinating for me, that when we build things, our agreements can come along the way.
Mm.
Whereas a lot of design practice, we have this idea that we're going to do all this brainstorming, all these kind of post-it notes, and then we're going to agree, and then we're going to build.
Yeah.
Which means that we have to
Yeah.
have sort of synchronized our ideologies, our values, all these things have to be synchronized before we see the material proof that we can work together. What if we can work together first and have a material proof that we can live together in this world and manifest our togetherness
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
before we actually agree on things? And I think this is like something that is so powerful about making the material sort of proof of our of our collaboration, that again we can actually the bench can be there and we have not agreed. We can be
Right.
actually two
Right.
totally different people that actually hate each other, if you want to say so, but the bench is there for people to
Right.
share.
You mentioned your PhD thesis, which was called Fashion Able, and you've described this as wanting to move away from fashionable to fashionability. I've heard you talk about this as you wanted to open up fashion. You wanted to take it out of the studio and put it out into like the hands of everyday people. And what's interesting to me about thinking about that in the context of this conversation is that there is an inherent power in being able to make something yourself or make something together. And I'm wondering how that changes design and maybe how we teach design when we think about it as not something that is discipline specific or something that lives in a studio or lives, something that only designers do, but something that becomes much more free flowing. I talk on the show a lot about how can design expand not through colonization but through democratization. So not saying like, oh, this is now design, this is now design, but actually like ground up saying anybody can design. How do you think through that move from kind of like professionalism to almost design as a liberal art?
It's both nice, I mean, both seductive and also troublesome in a sense, that yes, of course, everybody can be a designer and everybody should be, in some sense, engaged in the design of the world. At the same time, the designer is often hired and brought in to take responsibility for something
Mm,
too. As much as I also love, the excited design when everybody is a designer is a beautiful thing, but at the same time, it's like politics. If everybody's a politician, we are not all politicians. We do delegate certain kind of practices to some people because they should also be responsible for these decisions, and they should be held accountable for the decisions that they
yeah.
do. So again, I'm worried that as much as it's a wonderful idea and a wonderful, if it could be practiced in a sense, it also complicates things around responsibility, around accountability,
Yeah.
around what you actually want the designer, what you hire the designer to do. And again, here we have created ourselves a little bit of a, a trouble as designers when we say that designers no longer solve problems, but they frame them. Whatever we
Yeah,
often
right,
say,
right, right.
and it's just like, who's going to pay you to frame a problem or something? Like, why do you imagine? Why would anyone call the designer? It's like, yeah, we have a problem to be framed. Let's call the designer. Like, no, it's like, wait.
Right. Right.
Hopefully, we can also help actually not necessarily solve them in the ultimate way, but we can deliver on the promise that design can change things.
Right, right.
And I'm worried sometimes that we undermine the core of our practice, which is still that we can actually help people to imagine and build these things that we can create together.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think that's right. And I'm thinking about a line that I've heard you use in many contexts about this idea of hacking as a type of touching power. That when you hack something, that you are, you're sort of you're closer to power in a different way, and that feels similar to kind of the way that I was describing design as some sort of democratizing in some way. In that I don't know. I'm trying to articulate this because I think you're right. It's not about shifting responsibility, but it's about I don't, what is it, like allowing access to different types of power, allowing some sort of, making space for different types of interventions, maybe. Do you know what I'm trying to articulate there?
Yeah, yes, yes, and it allows for a sense of agency in the
Yeah,
world
agency is
that
a
is
great word. Yeah.
otherwise sort of trapped perhaps within. I often use this idea that design is a form of designation. Something that is
Hmm.
designed has a designated way of working. You
Yeah.
know, so
Yeah.
designers have pointed out an orientation, oriented the world towards certain kind of outcomes and so on. And often then we have, designed the world within certain, this various options of action,
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
designated forms of
Yeah.
action. And then activism is when we break those designations and we actually sort of short circuit them and we start moving in the other way, or other direction, and we break these designations, and that is sort of what I sort of call a sort of a material
Yeah.
counterintelligence, that we
Yeah.
actually sort of come up in challenge these designations. And again, with that comes exactly agency, but it also comes responsibility.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is one of the sort of the struggles I think we have when we are so deeply infused in consumer society, where what consumer society sells us is the idea that you can escape responsibility in a sense. You can escape certain consequences. So my single-use water bottle or my takeout coffee cup, etc. I don't have any responsibility for that. I don't have any.
Right.
It sort of
Right.
buys me a sense of freedom that I can cut the bonds to the world in some sense. And if we are treating more and more of the world like I think we have done, with the convenience that consumer society and how designers have designed consumer society exactly to
Yep.
not have us to train a sense of responsibility, it's going to be much harder for us to again practice this agency in a responsible way. And that's again
Yeah.
where I think the question of judgment comes in too. Is like, if we have to reimagine the design school as a place where we also have to practice judgment and responsibility within our own
Yeah.
institution, but we also have more agency to actually change things within our institution. And again, together with the students, that the whole school has to be more of a design studio than it's sort of a classic rigid
Right.
institution.
So I have one more question to wrap up, and this is another sort of big question, but we started this conversation reading the back cover of your book that says design is a hellmouth of disappointment and a harrowing pit of professional failure. And we've talked a lot about both of our frustrations with design and design academia, the hypocrisy, and then the so many of the problems that you've articulated across your career and your body of work. Maybe I'm reading into this, but I sense I don't sense a lot of negativity in your voice. You still seem to be excited about the possibilities of what this work can do. You haven't given up on it yet. At least that's what I'm taking from this conversation. You can tell me if I'm wrong. And I'm wondering how you do that, and where you see, now coming out of the design comedy, where design does become Dante's Inferno. Where do you take all of this work? How do you see your work moving forward?
I mean, first of all, like, how to stay positive, which is just go to the workshop and like build shit. No, I mean, there's something so joy, especially if you can do it with some colleagues. And of course, it's such a blessing working at a design school that has workshops where I can, of course, but others have studios and so on. But there's such a blessing in the possibility of having access to these fantastic tools that creates sort of a sense of gratification very quickly that you can actually build something and it's there in the world. Again, that is the superpower of design,
Mm,
that it is so convincing for other people when they
yeah.
are seeing the results of what we can do. And if that is sort of general sort of handiness or uh, being able to sort of build models of things, there's something that we are just closer to the fulfillment of these ideas that we had, even if it's we just built a model or we just built a prototype and it's a little bit wonky.
Mm-hmm,
But
mm-hmm.
there's something about that the change is on the way. And there's something that is very different in that process of making something that we can touch and
Mm,
agree upon, if you want to say so. That is not necessarily happening in the type of storytelling we otherwise do, or the post-it ideas or whatever you want to
yeah.
call it,
Yeah.
that so often promises or gives us ideas that are then unfulfilled.
Right.
Whereas in the making, we are actually approaching some sort of fulfillment. And I think that is, again, the superpower of design that we should just not forget. We should offer that more closely to the students and find ways to work with our theories and ideas that support that type of making. That is my hope, and how I try to sort of also frame my education, my pedagogy,
Yeah.
and my general work.
Yeah. I love that. I feel like that's like such a great kind of summation of everything that we've been talking about here. I loved the new book. I love the way you are thinking through these ideas. Otto, thanks so much for being on the show.
Thank you very much, Ed.
That was my conversation with Otto von Busch. His book is called The Design Comedy. Our theme music is by Jeremiah Chu. The show is funded thanks to the generosity of listeners like you. If you like what we are doing, I hope you consider supporting us and get some bonus content each month. You can follow us across social media at Surface Podcast. You can listen to all of our previous episodes wherever you get your podcasts and at our website, scratchingthesurface.fm. Thanks for listening.